This car has been sitting inside a forgotten barn for almost 100 years. Covered in rust, buried under dust, and completely abandoned by time. Most people would look at this and see nothing but scrap metal. But today, we're going to attempt something incredible. We're going to bring this 1920s classic car back to life. Deep in the countryside, hidden behind overgrown trees and collapsing wooden fences, stands an old barn that hasn't been opened in decades. Inside this barn lies a piece of automotive history, forgotten and untouched. When we first stepped inside, dust filled the air and the smell of old wood surrounded us. Sunlight slipped through the cracks in the roof, revealing piles of hay, broken tools, and something incredible hiding in the corner. Under a thick layer of dust and old fabric, we found it. A 1920s vintage automobile that had been sitting here for nearly a century. At first glance, the car looked almost beyond saving. The body was covered in heavy rust. The tires had completely rotted away. The paint had faded into nothing but cracked metal. Spider webs stretched across the headlights, and the windows were clouded with decades of dust. It was clear that this car hadn't moved in a very long time. But despite the damage, something about it was still beautiful. Beneath all the rust and decay, you could still see the elegant design that made cars from the 1920s so special. Before starting the restoration, we needed to inspect every part of the vehicle. The hood was stuck shut after decades of rust. The interior was almost completely destroyed. The leather seats had dried and cracked, the steering wheel was brittle, and the dashboard gauges were frozen in time. When we finally opened the hood, we discovered an engine that hadn't turned in nearly 100 years. Every bolt was rusted solid. Every moving part was seized.
That's it, break free.
Restoring this car would not be easy, but that's what made the challenge exciting. The first step in any full restoration is taking everything apart. Slowly and carefully, we began removing the old components. Some bolts came loose with patience and penetrating oil, but others snapped immediately after decades of corrosion. Piece by piece, the car started to come apart. The hood came off first, followed by the doors, the wheels, and finally the engine itself.
Ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. It's coming off. Watch the dust. Got it. Clear. All right, swing it clear.
Removing the engine was one of the most difficult parts of the process. The entire engine block was covered in thick grease and rust. Using a hoist, we carefully lifted it out of the chassis for a full rebuild. For the first time in nearly a century, the heart of this old machine was finally free. With the car completely disassembled, we could finally focus on the frame. Years of moisture and neglect had covered it in rust. To remove the corrosion, we used a sandblasting process that strips away rust and reveals the bare metal underneath. As the rust disappeared, something surprising happened. The frame was still incredibly strong. After minor welding repairs and reinforcement, the structure was ready for its new life.
There we go, solid now.
Next came the most delicate part of the restoration: rebuilding the engine. The engine was completely disassembled into dozens of individual components. Pistons, rods, gears, and bearings were all carefully cleaned and inspected. Many parts had to be restored or replaced to bring the engine back to working condition. Slowly, the pieces began to come together again. After hours of precision work, the engine was fully rebuilt. While the engine work continued, attention turned to the car's body panels. Rust had eaten through several areas of the metal. Using specialized tools, the damaged sections were cut away and replaced with fresh steel. Dents were hammered flat, edges reshaped, and every surface was sanded smooth.
I've been at this a long time. Restoring these old trucks is more than a job. It's about bringing history back to life.
After days of work, the body finally looked like a car again. Once the metal work was complete, the entire body was coated in primer to protect it from rust. Then came one of the most satisfying parts of the restoration, painting the car. To stay true to its original era, we chose a deep vintage color that reflects the style of the 1920s. Layer by layer, the paint was applied until the car began to shine again.
Look at that shine. Every inch polished to perfection. She's a real beauty now.
The interior of the car was rebuilt with the same attention to detail. New leather seats were crafted to match the original design. The wooden steering wheel was carefully restored and polished.
Needs a final buff. There we go.
Even the vintage dashboard gauges were repaired and brought back to life. The inside of the car once again reflected the craftsmanship of the early automobile era. With every component restored, the time had finally come to put the car back together. The rebuilt engine was lowered carefully back into the chassis. The restored body panels were installed one by one. Wheels were mounted, lights were attached, and every final detail was carefully completed. After months of work, the transformation was almost complete. Now came the moment we had all been waiting for. For nearly 100 years, this engine had been silent. Fuel was added. The ignition was connected. And with one final turn of the key, the engine sputtered, coughed, and suddenly roared back to life. Hearing that engine run again was an unforgettable moment. Slowly, the car rolled forward for the first time in decades. What was once a rusted relic hidden inside a barn, had become a fully restored piece of history. This restoration wasn't just about fixing an old car. It was about bringing a forgotten machine back from the past. A reminder that with patience, skill, and passion, even something abandoned for 100 years can live again. And now, this beautiful 1920s automobile is finally back where it belongs. On the road.